The Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Alberta Grains, C&M Seeds, and Syngenta Canada. Find more episodes of The Wheat School by going to wheatschool.com.
Hi, I'm Amber Bell, and this is Real Agriculture. I'm here today with James Tansey, who is the provincial entomologist with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture. So welcome, James. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Yep.
Okay, so we're going to talk about grasshoppers and thresholds.
Yes.
That's what we're going to talk about today. So I've heard that there were previous thresholds and that might be changing.
We have some established thresholds for different crop groups, and I can probably talk about that and maybe some of the interpolation that we're looking at right now. So for different crop groups, and I think it's probably important to frame this in a context of what species you're looking at.
Okay.
So if you're looking at wheat, then you have all of the pest species to worry about. Once again, we have 85 species of grasshopper in the province. Only 4 of these are ever typically pests. All 4 of these can be damaging in cereal crops, although two-striped grasshopper does prefer broadleaf plants, but it can still be damaging in cereal crops. For other crops like lentil and flour and flax and boll, the tolerance is lower. So for cereal crops, we're looking at about 10 to 15, 10 to 12, depending on how well that crop is growing for your threshold, and that's your action threshold. That's when a grower needs to take action. For canola and soybean, we're looking at about the same thing. Flax and boll or lentil and flour, it's 2 per square meter. So our tolerance is considerably lower because you clip that boll off, obviously you're gonna lose your marketable portion of that plant. Similar if you lose the flour on lentil, you're gonna lose the marketable portion of that plant.
Okay, and so you mentioned the different species of grasshoppers. What are the ones that wheat producers should be looking out for versus ones they can kind of be like,
So of course we have 85 species of grasshoppers, grasshopper in the province. The vast majority of these are never a problem. So we do have some relatively conspicuous ones. The speckled rangeland grasshopper that you'll see as an adult relatively early in the summer with blood red hind wings. The Carolina grasshopper that you'll see later in the year, quite a large grasshopper with bright yellow wings. A good mantra is if it's got wings in the spring, it's not a pest. Similarly, if it makes noise as it flies, or if it's a chirper or a caller or has long antennae, not a pest. So the 4 we need to worry about are by the numbers. Our primary pest by the numbers, of course, by density, is the two-striped grasshopper. And it is a generalist, although it does demonstrate a preference for broadleaf plants, but that's our primary pest. These females can be large. They can be 1.5 inches plus, and relatively heavy animals and consume a lot of plant material. The next most prevalent is the migratory grasshopper. Historically, this has been the most important pest, but in recent decades, it seems to have fallen to a second. Although you can have regional prevalence of any of the pest species. Probably tied for third and fourth really are Packard's grasshopper, which is like migratory grasshopper, a great generalists. They feed on a large number of plants, although they have demonstrated a preference for thistles.
okay.
So
make sure you get rid of the thistles in your field.
Of course, yeah.
That's basically it.
Yeah, problem solved, yeah. And finally, clearwing grasshopper, which is called a graminivorous animal. So it likes grasses. Yeah,
okay.
So it can be a serious cereal pest. So.
Okay, and so with the threshold, like going back to the thresholds, what are we looking at changing?
So what we proposed numbers for nymphs, and so that is, I encourage people to take a look at the table. So this is a work of interpolation. So it is an estimate of the nymphal densities based on the adult densities and some established nymphal densities that were worked out, by some of our colleagues, south of the 49th, and through discussion with them and evaluation of some of their documents, proposed these 4 nymphs. So an important consideration: these are nymph densities in mature plants. So these are, at least 4-leaf plus stage canola, we're relatively mature plants. Seedling plants, your tolerance is going to be lower for nymphs. So a relatively small number of nymphs, and they do tend to travel in relatively large numbers, can cause significant damage in an awful hurry.
So are the changes, would they be going up or down? What would the numbers look like?
Just broadly for adults versus nymphs, you're looking at least a doubling in the number of nymphs, sometimes a tripling depending on the crop.
Okay.
We've also presented some numbers for rangeland as well. And of course, rangeland, you're going to see some slightly different species. The 4 species that I mentioned can be problematic in range and historically are problematic in range. But in rangeland, you've also got some slant-faced grasshoppers, which can also be quite numerous and damaging as well. And they need to be considered as part of your thresholds.
Okay, so have there been any changes made then to scouting and the ability to spray?
Conditionally. We'll talk about. Let's talk about spray first. As some of you may be aware, some restrictions have been brought in on an important product or an important chemistry for grasshopper control, or a real go-to for a lot of growers, and that's lambda-cyhalothrin. So that's in products like Matador and Silencer. There's a relatively new product called Zivada, and another one called Volium Express. That's a mix of group 28 and that group 3. All of these are excellent products for controlling nymph grasshoppers, but because of new restrictions, growers need to be extremely careful not to use them on crops intended for feed.
Okay.
So yeah, that's definitely a no-go. Do not use them for feed. It's still permitted on a broad assortment of food crops, and I encourage growers to always check the label. At the worst of times, always check the label.
Right.
Also check the guide to crop protection. We've got some guidance in there as well.
Okay, and so when it comes to scouting, what are the changes in that? What would we be looking at?
We're not really looking at any changes in recommendations for scouting.
Okay.
So
get out there in your field.
Get out there in your field. It can be a little bit labor intensive, but my recommendation is to evaluate the grasshoppers in a 1 meter by 1 meter area. Of course, when your crop gets to be this high, that can be relatively complicated. But when the crop is relatively low, put your foot down. See what scatters from that 1 meter by 1 meter, count them, and go to the next, take another stride, repeat that 10 times, go about 25 meters, 50 meters, repeat that again until you get 50 meters, until you get 50 total counts. Divide that total by 50, that'll give you your per square meter.
Okay, and how often throughout the season should you be going out, or is there a certain stage of the plant growth that you should be going out?
Yeah, I would recommend for seedlings, certainly, at least to monitor the ditches around your field, see what kind of activity you're seeing there, see what's moving into your crop. Look at sensitive stages of your crop. Yeah, and that varies by crop, of course. So another thing that has come up as well is whether we can use sweep netting for grasshopper sampling, and in my experience, it's not so great.
Oh?
Yeah, the grasshoppers, they have excellent vision. They will scatter or hang on tight, and I find for myself, my counts are better if I'm physically just walking and counting the grasshoppers. Yeah, you can use sweep nets to determine species though, and that's a very useful tool for that. They can be difficult to determine just looking at them on a plant, so if you can scoop them up, get a closer look at them. It's also useful for nymphs as well, where you can do 4 pendulous swings, so 180 degrees swept along the ground. Walk forward, do that 4 times, and that'll give you a roughly per square meter equivalent. Yeah.
Okay,
but just for nymphs. Yeah.
And do you have any words of encouragement for producers going into this season that's wet and cold?
Yeah, I think the growing conditions are very good. I mean, I've seen some lush areas in the province, so I think crop health will be good. The crops will be robust and resilient, and can take some foliar damage even if we do see some grasshoppers come up in numbers. Of course, always look out for seedling crops and nymphs. But I think if this cool wet weather maintains, we could see some sickening and die off of those nymphs, and maybe some direct drowning events, which can be important as well.
Great.
And I wish everybody an excellent season. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And that was James Tansey on Real Agriculture.